All right, there we go. Okay, we're gonna get started here because it's 12 o'clock. There may be some people trickling in as I start talking because that's usually what happens. So, hello everyone, and welcome to our LinkedIn live session. Today is the topic of leadership for well-being: how to foster a flourishing workplace. I'm Emma Carpenter, workplace wellness strategist at 12 Weeks to Wellness. 12 Weeks to Wellness has provided personalized well-being support for employees across the country for over 20 years now. I'm thrilled to have you all with us today. We have a fantastic 20-minute conversation lined up that you're not going to want to miss today. We're diving into a crucial topic for anyone in a leadership role today, how to cultivate a flourishing workplace. We all know that a positive work environment not only drives organizational success, but it also plays a significant role in enhancing employees' well-being. So what are these key strategies to achieve this today that we're going to talk about? So to help us explore this important topic, we're joined by a true expert in the field. Please welcome Debbie Pearmain, an accomplished human resources consultant and coach with years of experience in guiding leaders to foster thriving, motivated, and happy teams. Debbie has a wealth of knowledge and practical insights to share with us today. I'm so excited to have you here today, Debbie. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really looking forward to our conversation.
Yeah, me too. So let's jump right in, Debbie. Can you start by explaining the concept of a flourishing workplace?
Absolutely. I do want to start by just saying that I am a certified flourishing workplace coach and consultant, and also a certified flourishing life coach. So, why I'm starting there is a lot of research that has been done by all kinds of organizations. One specifically I think of is Wellness Innovate, and they've done research into what are the components and the factors that actually help to make a workplace flourish. So we do have credible, right, research on this topic. And we know that flourishing workplaces are places that help to meet people's physical needs as well as their psychological needs. And that sounds pretty broad. So to break it down into what feels, I think, a little bit more tangible, things like, right, physiological needs. So where compensation is paying a living wage, where benefits are supporting people's health and mental health and well-being needs, work environments that protect physical safety as well as psychological safety. So places where trust and respect exist in the culture. Workplaces where everyone feels connected and like they belong. So this is where, as a company, it's embracing the concepts of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And then we want to make sure that we're engaging employees in their own growth and learning and development. So everything from training to recognition, positive performance management, right? So there's a number of components, but they all relate in some way to an HR practice or process. And so it's really making sure that, yeah, your company is providing for those key elements.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm thinking about when you're talking about this as well. Is there, well, first of all, I guess how do we know? How do we know if a workplace is flourishing? How do we measure that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I will say there are lots of assessment tools out there. For example, through my company, One Stop HR, do employee engagement surveys for my clients. And in the last 5 years, I've started to incorporate the 13 factors for psychological health and safety into those employee engagement surveys. So, why do we do engagement surveys? Because we know that when employees are consulted about their career experiences, they have a 4.6 times higher engagement level than companies that don't do that. So, number one, doing an annual employee engagement survey is crucial for the success of your business, for the health of your culture. And then you've got to then look at what are you measuring when you do engagement surveys. And as I said, I've been in HR 25 years. And I've seen all kinds of different assessments over the years. And of course, I don't want to say anything untowards or negative about some of the popular assessment tools that are on the market. But when I look at what the questions are and the categories are, even on some of those, great place to work assessments, I can tell you they're missing the mark on some pretty crucial elements. So knowing what to measure so that you have data, so that you create a baseline is really the important first step. And many clients come to me who are doing engagement surveys, not necessarily seeing, right, the fruit of their labor. So they feel frustrated. And I say, flip me over your engagement survey. Let me just take a look at the categories you're measuring, the questions you're asking, and right away, I can see where there are holes and there are gaps, right, in their assessment tool. But the assessment tool provides us with a baseline and a starting point. So we can measure all the components I mentioned to you earlier just to get a sense of whether or not the workplace is engaged, whether it's productive, whether people feel connected, people feel supported, right? All those important elements. And then from there, when we have the data, we now know the goals and the priorities and what to focus on. And so then we engage HR folks to create plans and strategies
Yeah.
to help execute on those
Mhm.
things.
Yeah. Because of course, so often too, they may not be using a tool that is giving them what they need. And so we end up not doing anything with it. And that does almost more, definitely more harm than good if we ask, but we're not listening. We're not actually doing anything about it, meaning it gives the impression that, yes, we heard you, but we don't care,
This is
fortunately.
it.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And one
Mhm.
of my best practices is I really, kind of vet out the clients that I want to work with when it comes to creating flourishing workplace cultures. And one of my, criteria for working with a company is what are you going to do with this information? So I need to know that the president and the executive team are on board, are bought in, not just to getting the results, but actually actioning and implementing some of the recommendations that I make after seeing the results.
Mhm. Okay, so that's obviously one thing that organizations and managers can do is to not just complete an engagement survey, but also make a plan to what you're actually going to do with it. But what are some other specific strategies that leaders can implement to create a flourishing workplace?
Yeah. I would say workplace well-being is probably one of the most important topics that I've been speaking on. I think I've been working in leadership development for over 20 years, and I've seen lots of trends come and go throughout my career. The last 5 years, I've spent most of my time consulting, teaching, coaching leadership teams on everything from understanding employee mental health and well-being to positive performance management to how to create a positive workplace culture, right? How to create trust and respect in relationships, how to communicate with employees, showing empathy, and also helping companies develop workplace well-being strategies so they can create a healthy work environment and a healthy culture. And we know that all begins with a healthy leadership team. So a part of that is also looking at the habits, the practices of the leaders to see what they are role modeling, right, to their teams and what they are saying is important and valuable in the environment. And we know that there's a ton of stuff that's happening that isn't healthy. And so it's not just about like slogans and having someone come in on Mental Health Week and doing a 1 hour webinar on good sleep or providing yoga. It's what do we agree as a leadership team is important? Do we want to have a healthy culture? How is that not just good for our people, but also good for our business? And then what are the components that are going to help us create that culture where people really are going to flourish and thrive? And the leadership team needs to buy in because it really needs to start with them.
So what does that look like then in terms of people being able to take on that identity so that it becomes part of the culture to create that flourishing workplace.
I will say that still to this day, I have challenges when I speak to CEO groups across the country. So I'm a speaker with Tech, the Executive Connection, and also with groups like McKay CEO Forums. And I still, when I go and speak on workplace mental health and well-being, flourishing workplace, will have business owners and executives in the room who say things like, why is this my concern? Why is this my issue? So there's still quite a lot of work that needs to be done on educating business owners and executive teams about, for example, things like what the World Health Organization is saying and what organizations like Deloitte, who do research on this stuff, is saying in terms of the positive ROI for your business on investing in things like mental health and psychological safety and workplace well-being initiatives. So we've got to get the buy-in of the leadership team first, and you need to be able to speak the language of business owners, which is, right, tell me the ROI. And so just really quickly, if there's anyone who's joining us today who, for example, is in HR and struggling to get their executives to really commit and buy into this, I want to encourage you to look at some of the really important research. So Deloitte did a great study. I don't know if you've seen it, Emma, and it came out in 2019, actually. So it was just as the pandemic happened, and it's called Good for People, Good for Business. And what they discovered in their research is that companies that invest in employee mental health and workplace well-being programs, even for 1 year, for every dollar invested, they'll receive a return of $1.62 within a year. And if they can commit to the initiatives for 3 years, the return will be $2.18. So it makes good business sense because we know that when employees are healthy and they feel safe and they feel motivated, they're going to show up to work and be more creative and innovative, more safe, more productive, right? And more engaged. And so it's going to help deal with a lot of the opposite issues that companies today are struggling with, like absenteeism, presenteeism, high turnover, right? We hear things like the war on talent is fierce, and companies are always saying to me, how do I attract and retain great people? I'm like,
Mm.
if your culture is not healthy, you're not going to attract great people, number one. And number two, your best people are going to leave you. They're not going to stick around. So it's really making sure that everyone at the leadership level understands why this is not just important from like a societal perspective and you're a caring employer, but also how it just makes really good business sense. And from there, we then can do things like assessments, figure out the areas that are weak and struggling or just non-existent, right? When I talked about those components earlier, and then put practical strategies in place to help strengthen the things in the culture that need to be strengthened.
So that leads me to another question that that I was just thinking about now. So we're in this kind of interesting corporate shift right now too, right? Where we have different generations, obviously, they're working towards where the younger generation that is very aware and really expects to be flourishing at work, and because they live in this era where we're talking about bringing your whole self to work, but we also have an older generation that looks at this very differently, where the saying was definitely more leave your personal life at home, check it at the door. So how, as a manager, how do you cater to both, and what are some strategies that you can use to both create a flourishing workplace and speak to the younger generation and the somewhat older, that they just look at it very differently just based on history.
Yeah, yeah, great question. So again, I think this comes back to things like leadership development. So one of the courses I teach in companies is about managing generational differences. So first of all, are we educating our leaders to know, understand, value, and appreciate the positives that each generation that works for us brings to our culture and our work environment? And the answer right away to that question is no, right? We hear all kinds of bias, unconscious, conscious, that comes up often in conversation. So, educating leaders about how to understand, appreciate, value, and manage generational differences would be another really good training session, right? To have for your leaders. Again, so that they understand what they're doing and why they need to be doing this. So you're absolutely right. Younger generations are valuing things like work-life balance more. And in fact, it's one of the number one reasons for turnover. Number one reasons for turnover. So when I ask questions on my survey, like I can see myself working here in 2 years, right? And then we get a statistic for that question. Depending on the answer, my next question is if you answer disagree or strongly disagree, can you tell us why? And I wish again, I would be a wealthy woman for every dollar that I had for the surveys I've done over the last few years, where the reason why is because of this lack of work-life balance. Now, just pause on that for a moment, because another training session that I teach organizations is called work-life integration. Because as you and I know, this is the space we work in. Work-life balance doesn't exist anymore. That concept is no longer relevant. Why? Because the world of work has changed significantly since the introduction of this stuff. We don't have clear boundaries between our work life and our personal life. Everything is blurred, things are enmeshed. So that requires a different way, right, of leading, of managing, and relating. So if we're going to have work-life integration where everything's blurred, then what are going to be some of our absolute practices that we're going to agree to as an organization? And I've got brave HR VPs and directors across the country who have literally started implementing things like the right to disconnect, right? I mean, we have legislation in Canada that says this is important and healthy.
Mhm.
Employees have a right to not be connected 24/7 to their employer. But I, again, could tell you the majority of clients I work with are like, what? I didn't even know that was legislation. We for sure don't have a policy on that. And I 100% can guarantee it isn't a practice within the culture, right? So there is so much we could talk about in order to answer your question. But just even helping maybe more senior leaders who have been around 20, 30 years understand and appreciate the differences and the different needs of the generations, and then create, again, kind of the HR practices or policies to support those needs. That's what's going to help you attract and retain great people. You got to know, why are they leaving you? Why are they interested in joining you? Right? So if a question's like, did you join us in the last year? If yes, what attracted you most to working for us? And again, I can tell you it's not the compensation,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? The answers I'm hearing are you have a great career development program, you invest in people's growth, you've got great workplace well-being supports, you allow for better work-life, quote unquote, balance or flexibility. These are the things that are attracting people. These are the things that are helping people stay, right? And a lot of it has to do with your brand, because we also
Yeah.
know now, because of the internet and social media, if people are leaving you because they've had toxic, unhealthy, negative experiences, it no longer is just staying with them and their family and friends. It's all over the internet, right? All I have to do is do a search on a company I'm considering applying for, and I can see all the ratings of what people have said who have worked there before, right?
And people even leave organizations just because they, not just because, but because they feel that their values aren't in alignment with the company values. And
And
they,
that's a whole nother, Emma.
yeah.
Like so many of my clients have values that are posted on websites, posted in meeting rooms, on posters in lunchrooms.
Mhm.
And when I do training and I'll ask leadership teams, who can tell me the 6 company values? It's
Yeah,
like crickets in the room.
yeah.
And if I were to ask employees, like word on the street, tell me your
Mhm.
values, they might get one or two. And the
Yeah.
next question is beyond the poster, are people living those values?
So
So
more specifically, they're leaving because their values aren't in alignment with the culture that is at work, probably more specifically. Yeah.
well, this is why people leave
Hmm.
relationships
Yeah.
because there's a
Yeah.
values disconnect. So if you
Hmm.
state trust and integrity is a corporate value, but then you have leaders who are disrespectful to employees and sometimes outright, for example, bullying, harassing, or discriminating against certain people, right? There's a massive disconnect there.
All right, so time to wrap up. We've already gone over the time. We could talk about this for weeks, Debbie, for
I'll be
sure.
happy to come back, Emma. We can break
Yeah,
it down
let's.
even. I mean, there's so many things I could say to you quickly, right? Gratitude exercises, random acts of kindness, incorporating meditation into
Mhm.
workplaces, creating more positivity in meetings. Like, there's so
Mhm.
many little tangible things, rewarding and recognizing people who live values, not just to
Yeah,
achieve goals, right? There's a
yeah,
lot of shifts that leaders can make low cost,
mhm.
no cost,
Yeah,
that can
yeah.
just start to help people feel a little
Hmm.
safer, a little more
Yeah.
motivated, and a little more engaged.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, so next week, if you go in and follow 12 Weeks to Wellness on LinkedIn, you'll see that there's going to pop up. We'll share some videos from this conversation today, but also we'll start sharing out the topic for next week when I'm talking to Brandy Zimmerman. And we're talking about the very relevant topic at the moment right now, where how do you prepare for a vacation? Both an individual and how can you help support your team in preparing for vacations as well. And critical component there again is that communication, of course, connecting and making sure that people feel listened to and that they are supported. So thank you again, Debbie, for joining us today. Much appreciated. And yeah, let's chat again soon.
Keep the conversation going. Thanks for all the great work you're doing, Emma. Take care.
Thank you, you too. Yeah. All right. Goodbye.